Good morning or good afternoon. Thank you all for joining this session, Crafting Your Fund and Climate Action Strategy, that is part of a bite-sized webinar series. This webinar is part of a series to support companies, no matter where they are on their climate journey, to navigate fund and climate action and understand how and why we need to be dramatically scaling and refining mechanisms for channeling finance into climate action, not tearing them down. Some housekeeping rules. As usual, you will all be on mute. If you have questions, please write them in the chat box. We will have time for a Q&A at the end of the session, and otherwise we'll aim to get back to all of the questions via email. This session will be recorded and shared with you afterwards. My name is Chris. I am a business developer and key account manager based in South Pole, Singapore office. Over the past 2.5 years, together with my colleagues, I've been supporting clients' sustainability and climate leadership journey across Asia and Middle East. For this webinar, I'm joined by Ricky. Ricky leads APAC's carbon portfolio offering team, focusing on structuring carbon credit offers for South Pole's clients in the voluntary carbon market for both spot and long-term procurement. A quick intro about South Pole if you don't already know us. We have grown from a group of university friends 17 years ago in Switzerland to 1,300 people in 50 locations who have helped channel finance to 850 climate projects and supported thousands of companies to reduce their climate impact by providing certificates and consultancy services. And we are only just getting started. In the past webinars, we've covered the need and role of funding climate action, as well as quality assurance throughout the project development process. Today, we are focusing on how to build your funding climate action strategy. As we know, funding climate action plays a key role in achieving an ambitious net zero target, which is made up of 3 parts. Part 1, science-based targets to guide emissions reductions to 90% of your footprint across all scopes. This could be done by switching to renewable energy and engaging or encouraging your suppliers to do the same. The second part, beyond value chain mitigation. Companies should procure carbon credits for all residue emissions to realize beyond value chain mitigation efforts encouraged by SBTi from now till net zero. The third part, neutralization. For the last remaining residue emissions, which are less than 10% of a company's total emissions, a company could achieve its net zero goal with carbon removal credits. Companies must reduce their carbon emissions, but systematic reductions take time, and we don't have time to spare. So funding climate action brings multiple benefits that we've touched on in previous webinars. It helps to accelerate decarbonization efforts, internalize carbon costs, differentiate from competitors, get ahead of compliance and align with best practice, and receive positive public perception and employee retention. With carbon credits featuring in the strategies of many companies, analysis predict that demand may outstrip supply in the future, leading to an increase in prices. These price increases will affect a company's net zero transition plan. Bloomberg NEF has developed pricing scenarios on how pricing may develop between now and 2050, depending on whether avoidance and removal projects continue to be accepted by carbon registries. Under a moderate pricing scenario, PwC predicted that the cost of carbon credits will increase by over 250% in 2030. Therefore, acting now to secure your carbon credits can help hedge against future price increases. So how do we build a credible carbon credit strategy? Ricky will walk through several essential tips now. Ricky, over to you.
Thanks, Chris, and hello, everyone. And I'll jump straight into this slide where we will talk about how do we build a credible carbon credit strategy here. And our team at South Pole, we have worked with thousands of companies from all sectors, from small to large corporations, to help them with their climate action plan. And we have compiled a list of 5 key tips that we think will be quite essential to buyers who are looking into creating and forming a strategy of their own. Right, so we'll jump to it and talk about it one by one. Right, we move to the next slide. So the first tip is going to be educating and training your team and stakeholders. Right, so undoubtedly any successful carbon credit procurement plan is going to depend on a team that is very knowledgeable, stakeholders who are well educated on carbon credit market itself. And because there's so many differences about carbon credit types, technology types, the market dynamics, and all the procurement options out there. So being well-versed in this topic is going to be very essential, especially for people who are in charge, who need to make decisions on this strategy, make long-term plans, and ultimately the one who will ensure that the ambitions of the corporations will be realized at the end of the day. Right, so we want to ensure that the team and the stakeholders involved in this is educated on the topic and have a deep understanding on all the nuances in the carbon credit market. The next slide, the second tip here is going to be objective, boundary, and timelines. Right, so a successful carbon credit strategy is going to hinge on clear objectives. So this objective is going to align internally with your company's goals, visions, and missions. So you have to be able to answer why you are doing this and what it will mean for your corporation's broader sustainability strategy as well. Right? For example, if reaching net zero objective is going to be the strategy, then a company might choose to align with, for example, SBTi, net zero guidance. That will be one of the carbon compensation goal that can be set up by a corporation, for example. Right. However, entities can also possess a variety of valid motivations outside of these purchasing credits as well. It could be part of a bespoke target of a company, or it could be one ambition that is nested as part of a broader sustainability strategy as well. That could also be considered part of the objective and the boundary that you set for yourselves. Beyond value chain mitigations, that's also another thing that is sort of for companies to do something, not just reducing emissions in their own value chain, but to go beyond that, right? Funding climate actions outside of the value chain. This can also be achieved in different ways, depending on the company's motivations, plans, timelines. So businesses may wish to align their credit purchases for their social impact targets as well. Take, for instance, a company that is producing women's product. They might want to support a carbon project that is aligned with SDG goals number 5, which is gender equality, women's empowerment, for example. Right, so formulating a well-defined objectives, encompassing the budget, the volume, and aligning with the timelines and the goals and the clear motives of the companies, that is going to be another key essential component of the strategy. If you move to the next slide, that would be number 3, setting criteria and high integrity credits. And as we can see in the slide itself here, this is all about the company setting up the preferences, the considerations when purchasing carbon credits. So it can include factors like technology, certification, geography, the project management of the project itself. These can all impact the quality of the carbon credit. As we know, I think in the market, carbon credit market, there's so many different projects and they all carry different benefits and different risks. So setting this preference is going to help you to align yourself with the projects that matter most to your objectives, and it could also help to balance various risks in this pool of large carbon credits available in the market by setting preferences, something that you are able to accept, something that you are able to tolerate according to your risk appetite. So you want to align yourself with projects that you consider yourself that is have the lowest risk to you with the highest reward. You want to partner yourself up with the high reputation sellers, picking up the most preferred standards that is aligning with your goals and objectives, and allowing for the most efficient decision making in this dynamic process. I think in a previous webinar, we also discussed integrity of the carbon project. But to ensure integrity in your selection itself, we also recommend a couple of questions that you should ask yourself when you talk about setting criteria about carbon credits here. So first thing is going to ask yourself, what is your carbon credit provider quality assurance process? And you have to make sure that they sort of align themselves with a trusted framework organizations. So for today's, it's going to be, for example, ICROA, industry best practice today. And there are many others as well that are coming up. The latest one in the market that people are talking about today is most probably going to be ICVCM, VCMI goals that is hopefully going to start coming up with a list of credits by next year, for example. Next one is going to understand the credits you're buying. So I think as a team and as an expert, you should be able to answer why you are choosing the credits that you just purchased. And last but not least, have this strategy, this framework for carbon credit criteria being developed by an expert. So this sort of ties back up to tips number 1, which is that the team and the stakeholder involved should be educated and well-versed on the carbon credits itself. They do carry a lot of benefits, but at the same time, there's also a risk. They should have a well understanding of it before you embark. We've helped thousands of companies in this, and we see too many frameworks or policies set up internally that sometimes do not make sense, sometimes do not align internally with their objectives, sometimes they do not align with the international best practice standard out there in the market, for example. So that is what we want to ask the buyers to be consideration. If we move to the next slide, the next step is going to be determining the budget and contract preferences. So similarly to setting preferences on carbon credit, this is more going to be about determining the constraint within your own company. So it is going to be unique for companies to companies. So you can either decide to do a bottom-up approach or a top-down approach when doing financing climate actions. A bottom-up approach is going to be when you look at the market itself, the carbon credit market, see what's out there, see what's available, picking the best one, and then from then on, you start the selections as a bottom-up approach. Or top-down approach would be where you looked up your own corporation's objectives, timeline, the budget first, and then you go down from there, see what's available in the market based on your preference. There's no right and wrong method as well here. It's about determining and choosing which preference you would go for. There's so different types of procurement, for example. Will you be going for a spot procurement, term deal, project investment, or go for a fund instead? And they all carry their own benefits and risk here. And it has to tie back to the objective, the boundary, and the timeline that you set for yourself, which is what we mentioned earlier, the second step there. And there's not going to be a single best solution out there that is adopted widely across the market. So this one, that's why having being well educated on the subject and determining your own budget and constraint and contract preferences that it align best to your own internal target is going to be crucial here. And then if you go to the last tip, next slide, it's going to be a communication plan. Yeah, this is the last one, but definitely not the least important. So do not leave communication as an afterthought. Yeah, so be transparent, be authentic, and plan this from the start. Right? After aligning your communication strategy with your long-term goal, long-term strategy, it's going to ensure that your action actually creates maximum value here. At the end of the day, I think most of the players are doing this strategy. We are in a voluntary market. There's only some that is doing this for compliance, but ultimately because it's voluntary market, most of this is sort of a voluntary act by players. There is no right or wrong. So the best thing you can do is actually to create that communication plans, communicate to your stakeholders, to your customers, end customers, why you are doing this and what it means. That will actually be a way for you to generate a return from the investment that you put into this strategy, improving the brand value, increasing returns in the long run. At the same time, it also can be considered as a hedge against the changing terminology in the carbon credit market. As we know, it's a voluntary market, so there's still a lot of changes, improvements that we see in the markets today. Some strategies sort of get criticized, some gets changed to the other way. So as long as you have this overarching long-term communications plan in place, communicate it to your stakeholders and end clients, you can be reassured that whatever short-term steps, spot procurement that you do is actually aligned and sort of is one step of the long-term path that you have in place. So that if something gets changed, some terminology gets removed, at least you can be reassured that that actually part of the long-term plan and your stakeholder and customer actually understand that as part of the longer-term plan that you have for yourself. Right? So if you're interested to learning more about the claims and communications, we have recently written up a report on this that you can find in our own website. So please do check out afterwards. All right, so these are the key 5 steps that we have compiled for you in the very short and quick manner here. And if we move to the next slide, basically the result of all these steps is going to give you that strategy that encompasses all the different factors that we want you to consider. And if you follow all that, you will find that little sweet spot in the middle that is going to balance between credibility, integrity, risk, cost, and basically unlock that maximum value for your own operation that is uniquely yours and aligning with your corporation objectives. Right? And next slide, please. So if this is too much for you, if you're new to this, if you're not sure what is the most cost-efficient way to get started, you're not sure what is the criteria for you to follow, please do reach out to us. South Pole can support you in different elements of this strategy that we've discussed earlier. I think recently we also helped a company, if you move to the next slide, if we want to share, case study that we did for a major international brewing company here who came to us initially wanted to started off just creating a roadmap for their internal GSG reduction roadmap. But then South Pole basically step up, supported them along the journey. But what we've done was we created this ambitious and long-term climate strategy instead that encompassed the reduction roadmap, but also an action that they could take beyond the value chain mitigation. And that sort of gives them both the long-term thinking and also the short-term results that they could do, as well as the projection of the internal carbon prices that will be the cost for them. Yeah, so that is one of the recent successful example that we're very proud of. We want to share here today as well. Right, and to recap this webinar, if you go to the next slide very quickly. So so basically, we talk about crafting the integrated climate action strategy. Here, we answer the questions of why, which is to reach net zero target through neutralizing the remainder of emissions and also maximizing the impact of the beyond value chain mitigation actions for the companies. We also talk about how this procurement strategy can also help hedge against future changes, volume price changes of the carbon credits itself. And we talk about the how with the 5 keys that we've compiled, which encompass training your team, getting educated on the subject itself, aligning on the objectives, creating the boundaries and timeline for your own companies, developing a carbon credit criteria framework that is going to create the most benefit to you with the risk that you are able to take. Also determining budget and contract preferences, especially with carbon credit procurement, where a lot of nuances, a lot of differences and between different projects are starting to coming up. So determining that budget that is acceptable for your firm is going to be important too. And last but definitely not least is to have a communications plan on this strategy from the start and be authentic, be clear and what you want to communicate and what you want to create the impact to your end consumer, your stakeholders as well. Right, so hopefully that's a good recap of the whole climate action strategy. And now I'll pass the time back to Chris. Over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Ricky. Now we come to the Q&A session. Meanwhile, please keep the questions coming in. We will try to cover as many questions as we can, but if we run out of time, we will get back by email for all of the remaining questions. The first question is extremely relevant to help companies plan their carbon budget, Ricky. What does the price of the carbon credits depend on?
All right, thanks for the question. So this would be a very generic question. It would be very hard to answer. Basically, there's multiple factors that is going to determine the price of the carbon credits. As I mentioned earlier, I alluded to it that there's so many different varieties of carbon credits out there in the market, and all of these factors actually one way or another will affect the price. And a lot of this is also due to the fact that we are in a voluntary carbon market at the moment. So it means that there's no right to wrong. There's no police who's going to tell you which one is the credit you're going to go for. Right? So that's why everything, including the standards out there, or we could call it programs, something like Gold Standard, Vera, the differences in this will also affect the price. The vintage year, the year that the carbon credit was actually generated by the project activity, that will also sort of affect the price as well. The project types, whether it's renewable energy, nature-based, or household devices type of projects, that can also affect the price, usually by the demand side, where companies who have products that is associated with paper, for example, they will want to favor projects from the nature-based solutions type of projects, for example, and that will sort of affect the price for the volume of the carbon credits you're purchasing. That can also affect the price, right? This is similar to how the commodity markets work as well. So a lot of it's still basically it's about demand and supply factors component here, and it can still change. We have seen a lot of changes in terms of price over the last few months and even few years as well. So this is something you should continue to look out for, and then yeah, I will see how the price changes in the future too. Right? Thanks.
Yep, indeed, there are so many factors that will influence the supply and demand of a voluntary carbon market. And just now, Ricky, you mentioned that standards themselves may have an impact on the pricing as well. So when it comes to the voluntary carbon market, I know there are so many different standards and frameworks, and they may be quite confusing or even overwhelming for companies who just enter this market. What are some of the most important carbon credit standard or framework that we should look at? Could you further explain that? Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. So this is a good question. I think similarly to what I alluded to earlier, the fact that this is still a voluntary carbon market. So there's, again, no right or wrong frameworks out there. So I wanted to put it out there so that you understand that at the end of the day, you need to understand what each standard stands for, what each framework is about, and then make your own decision based on your own risk appetite or your own corporations. But we do see some similarities across different frameworks and standards out there. After all the like a handful or more than a handful of entities coming up with one right now, and you might heard some of this as well, like additionality factor, permanence, verification, verifiability of the credits. These are some of the sort of components that become a key aspects of the frameworks when they look into it. But still, right, even though we talk about additionality must be proved, different frameworks sort of come up with a ways of how to prove that, and that is the little nuances that will still create the differences between all these frameworks. So there are many out there. Which one is the best one? I would say the one that we stick to today, which is the industry best practice, is ICROA. Right? So basically, it's basically list out all the programs that hit all these factors that I mentioned earlier: additionality, permanence, verification, so on and so forth. No double counting on registry. So because that's a framework that has been established and sort of grouped together and is ready today, right? But moving forward, there are many. They're still coming up. There's a new one coming up that we should continue to look at and be very educated, understand what all the new ones coming from. So this is very important. That's why I remind you, whenever you are trying to choose a framework or a standard, please have an expert who looked at it, who understand what these frameworks are about. I mentioned earlier about ICBCM. That's the latest one that a lot of people are looking at it, are asking about it. They released a framework recently, but basically it will still take some time. I think they're aiming to give a label to credits, at least a few of them by the late this year, but we expect probably by next year we'll have a clearer clarity of what type of projects will fit this framework, and we have a better understanding of this framework going forward. So that is also another one to look out for. And Southpole have already been preparing on this one, and yeah, we'll share more once we have a better understanding on this framework in the future. Right, thank you.
Thanks, Ricky. And absolutely, as many companies are starting to offset their emissions or planning for their net zero ambition, we see that the space is ever evolving, and increasingly there are regional standards as well, or frameworks. So we really have to keep a close eye on the development. And then the last question, one attendee asked, what do you mean by beyond value chain measures? So I'm guessing that the attendee want to understand more about beyond value chain mitigation. Could you give some examples, and why is it very important to corporates?
Sure, thank you for that. Probably to start, talk about what is beyond value chain mitigations. So basically, this is a particular term said by SBTI organization and their framework there, but other also use sort of different terms for the same meaning, right? Basically, for you to mitigate and finance climate actions that is not part of your value chain. So it's the opposite of you doing something for your own company, reducing GHG emissions along the value chain, your own value chain. So this is about doing something that is not part of it. For example, if you're doing, let's say, bottling in Vietnam, doing beyond value chain mitigation will be to paying for something else that is not related to that, not related to part of your value chain. So that's the meaning of beyond value chain mitigation. Right? So why are people doing this? We believe that reducing your own GHG emission, that should be a priority, right? But at the same time, I think there's a growing, as we know it, right? Global warming is not waiting for everyone. We need a collective actions from everyone to do it, and that includes people who may be able to reduce their GHG emissions, but at the same time, they still have sort of more power, more resources to do beyond that, to help others who can't start today. So that is why all this collective action is so important, that it's become part of many frameworks today, is to do more than what you did, and also do cover for what you have done previously in the past, right? Reducing your own emissions along your value chain, probably you will start from today onwards, but what about emissions that you've created over the past 10 years, past few decades, right? And that's why beyond value chain mitigation is about compensating, paying for that part of the emissions that you've done in the past too. So that's the differences between beyond value chain mitigation and reducing your own emissions along inside your value chain. Right, so I hope that answers.
Thanks, Ricky. And I really like your statement just there. So you said like the planning cannot really wait. We really have to act from today. So that is really like the key message of this series of the webinar. Please act today to save our planet. Thanks, Ricky, and thanks everyone for participating in today's webinar. Keep in touch via social media like LinkedIn or our website, and we hope to see you again in our future events. See you next time.
Thank you, everyone.